Hi guys. Vishy Anand once said that you never know which mood Vassily Ivanchuk aka Chucky is going to be in. Some days he will treat you like a long lost brother and some day he ignores you completely. Well, the same goes for Chucky's games as well. If he is in a mood, he will defeat the best of world champions. And when not, he can blunder easily the winning positions as well. Today was such a game for Chucky when he defeated Magnus Carlsen in Chess24 Legends of Chess tournament. You can read more about the format of the tournament in the description below. The time control for this game was 15 minutes with a 10 seconds increment, and no draw offers were allowed before 40 moves. So heading to the game, Carlsen was playing with white pieces and Chucky was playing with black pieces. Carlsen started with d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, bishop b4 check. So Bogo-Indian defense. Bishop to d2 is the most common move here, but Magnus went for knight to d2, the Gruenfeld variation of Bogo-Indian defense. And Chucky, he castled on the king's side. a3, kicking away the bishop. Bishop to e7, e4. This is consolidating the center of the board as well as he's getting ready to bring his light squared bishop. So, light squared bishop. So here, d6, bishop to e2, knight from f to d7. This position has been reached many times in 2020 itself. The latest being on 15th of July between a game between Alexandra Kostanovic and Bibisara. Most common move in this position is to play b4, further consolidating the center of the board. But Carlsen is not happy with his position of the knight here. So he took back the knight and played knight to b1, d5, and bringing the knight to c3, repositioning it to a more active square. Here d captures on e4, knight captures on e4, knight to f6, and this is the position where we have a completely new game. Queen to c2, knight from b to d7, knight from e to g5, threatening a checkmate. If this knight moves from its position, then there will be a checkmate on h7. So c5 was played, bishop to e3, and in this position Chucky took a long time and finally played queen to a5 check. And Magnus played king to f1. Magnus showed no interest in castling either on the king's side or the queen's side. King to f1 means that he is going to push this pawn on the h file, kind of. So let's say if h6 is played in this position, then h4. And in case there is a capture on g5, then capturing on g5, and this knight is under attack, and there will be a threat of checkmate on h7 square. So Carlsen played king to f1 and then queen to c7. Rook to d1 was played, developing the rook. Bishop b6, knight to e5. This is actually a pawn sacrifice by Magnus. He's trying to get a more active play on the king's side, and Chucky accepts. So knight captures on e5, d captures on e5, queen captures on e5, bishop to f3, rook b8. So the bishop was attacking the rook, so just kind of protecting. Rook to b8 and h4. Queen to c7, rook to h3, planning to move to g3 next and attacking bringing it to the line or the same line as the king. Bishop to b7, rook to e1, and rook from b to d8. Black is much better in this position. He's a pawn up, but Chucky actually had only 1.5 minutes left, and Magnus has 5 minutes in this position. But as the format of the game is, you get 10 seconds increment for each move that you play. So considering that the time can be gained at a later stage. Here bishop was played, bishop to b7, and queen captures on b7, bishop to d2. The plan is that you will bring the bishop to c3 and rook to g3, and both of them will be attacking this this pawn on g7 square. So h6 was played, and bishop to c3. This knight can still not be captured. Sorry, this knight can still not be captured, because if knight captures, then pawn captures, and this knight is still under threat, and there can be a checkmate on h7 square. So rook from f to e8 was played, and here Carlsen spent around 4 minutes out of his 5 minutes left. The reason being that he probably wanted to sacrifice the knight and capture this pawn on f7, because after king captures on f7, rook to g3, threatening queen to g6, and also capturing this pawn on g7. So after rook to g8, defending the pawn, queen to g6, and king to f8, rook to e7, capturing this pawn, and then rook to d1, check, king to e2, and then rook to d6. This leads to a very solid defense and very complex position, which is very difficult to calculate in a short time. So here Carlsen decided not to capture finally the rook, the f7 pawn. Instead, he played g1, moving the king to a more safer square. Then rook to d7 was played, planning to bring the rook to the d file, other rook to d file as well, and doubling up the rooks. Knight to f3. Sorry, knight to f3, and bishop to d6. Knight to e5, exchanging the pieces. So bishop captures on e5, bishop captures on e5, and rook from e to d8, doubling up the rooks. Bishop to c3, queen to c7, and queen to c1. This queen to c1 move is actually a mistake, and as it allows Chucky to play knight to e4. Chucky found this move within 10 seconds remaining on the clock, and now the bishop has nowhere to go. Magnus has to exchange this bishop against the knight. He cannot capture this this knight with the rook, because if captures, then black rook to d1, check, and the queen will be lost. So here, after knight to e4, rook to f3 was played, knight to c3, queen to c3, and rook to d4, attacking the h4 pawn, c4 as well as the h4 pawn. Since the bishop is no longer on c3 now, so this diagonal is free, and black's pieces can come to it very easily. So so this move is also blocking this queen's movement on the diagonal. So g3 was played, rook to d7, b3, and queen to c6, attacking the rook. And here both Carlsen and Chucky had very less time left, so so they made some very quick moves to get the 10 seconds increment and get further time to come up with a better strategy. So some very quick moves were played here. So rook to e3, a5, a4, queen to d6, queen to c2, queen to c6, queen to e2, rook to d6, queen to h5, queen to d7, queen to f3, queen to d8, king to h2, rook d8, rook d2, rook e2. So this here rook e2 was played so that Chucky cannot go to rook to b2 and then bringing another rook to d2, sort of doubling up on the second row. So he played rook to e2, and then rook captured on e2, queen captured on e2, rook to d2, queen to e1, h5, sort of attacking this square and blocking the king's movement if needed. So h5, rook f3, protecting. So f3 is protecting the pawn on this f2, as well as it is supporting the idea of queen to e4, and after that queen to b7, which will be attacking this pawn on b7, b6, at the same time attacking this pawn on f7. So after rook to f3, g6, queen to e4, the idea we just saw, rook to d4 and queen to b7. Rook to d7, protecting the pawn on f7, and queen to c6, king to g7, king to g2, rook to d6, queen to b7, and queen to d7. Chucky is a pawn up, so he is offering a queen exchange here, but Magnus does not want to do it. So queen to e4, f6, next pawn push on f5 and e5, this is coming up. So here rook to e3, e5, king to h2, rook to d2, rook e2, rook d4, queen a8, rook d3, attacking the b3 pawn. So rook to b2 defending, and f5, queen to b8, queen to d6. This is protecting the pawn as well as offering the exchange again. Queen to b7, Magnus still does not want to exchange the queens, and threatening, also checking the king. So king to h6 and queen to c8. Now this is threatening a checkmate on h8 square, but Chucky saw it and played queen to f6, queen to c7, f4, rook to e2, f captures on g3, f captures on g3, and e4. Carlsen cannot capture here on e4, because if captures, then rook to d2, and then after king to h3 there will be queen to f1 checkmate. So here Carlsen instead played queen to b8, rook to b3, queen to e8, e3, and king to g2. Here the best move for black is actually to play queen to d4, protecting the pawn as well as attacking the white pawn. But Chucky here played rook to c3. This is allowing white to capture the pawn on e3, and it sort of equalizes the position. So rook captures on e3 and rook captures on c4, and rook to f3. And here black needs to play either rook to c2 check or queen to d4. But black here played, Chucky actually blundered here. He played queen to g7 check. This is immediately winning if by playing either rook to f7 or rook to f8, and then ideas of rook to h8 checkmate, and there is no way to prevent it. He will have to lose his queen. But actually Magnus missed this move in this position, and he played queen to e3 check, and this again equalizes the position. So king to h7, queen to e6, threatening rook to f7 and taking the queen. So here rook to c2 check, and this is also actually winning for white, as after king to h3, white is still threatening f7. So black will go to h6, and after queen to e3 check and king to h7, queen to e8, and then he's again threatening the so after king to h6, black is again threatening the f7 or f8 ideas. But here after king to h6, Carlsen played queen to Carlsen played king to e3 check, and after king to h7, Carlsen missed the win again, and instead of going back to queen to e8, he played queen to b3. Now this looks like a very good move, as it is attacking the rook on c2, as well as it is attacking the pawn on b6, as well as it is threatening this rook to f7. But this is also a win for black, as Carlsen played here something which completely wins it for black. Chucky played something here which is immediately winning for black. What did Chucky play? Can you pause the video and find out while I give you some time? So Chucky in this position played queen to d7 check, and here on move 74, Carlsen resigned, because there is not much left for there's not much for Carlsen to do here. If he plays like pawn to g4, then simply king to g4 checkmate. And yeah, this was quite an interesting game, with Chucky being the better most of the time. Both Chucky as well as Carlsen missed a few moves, with Carlsen missing the most important ones, leading to Chucky proving to be a horror for another world champion once again. More rounds of Chess24 Legends of Chess coming up, so subscribe to our channel and click on the bell icon to stay notified of our videos every week. Till the next video, have fun playing chess. Courageous signing off.